also be talking about the Torah in translation. And so you can buy a Bible from JPS, the Jewish Publication Society, and it's called the Torah. Okay, I think it's an excellent translation to kind of consult, because it gives you another point of view. It's done by all people of the Jewish faith. And so it can mean either one. You kind of have to specify after that. And Torah is interesting. It can mean the entire, what we call the Old Testament. It can mean the whole Hebrew Bible. Sometimes you hear Jews say the Torah, and they even mean the whole Bible, plus the Mishnah and the Talmud. Everything can be the Torah. And so that it's interesting, but I imagine you mean probably the first 5 books type of.
We went to visit the synagogue,
yeah.
Congregation Beth Ellen, so we saw their scrolls and their.
Nice. What synagogue did you go to?
Congregation Beth Ellen.
Okay, good. Very good. That's Temple Beth, though, is that right? Yeah. So yeah, okay. Now back in our back home on the ranch in Job here. Okay, if you'll open up with me just to chapter 1 here. Now this is one part of Job, and let me say a bit of something about kind of what goes on in this process. Job can be tricky, as actually there's really nowhere in the Bible it's not a bit tricky. How many people here have you had this experience? You've started learning about the Bible, and all of a sudden maybe you learned something that was like, wait a minute, like that's not exactly how I was always told my whole life. That's a little bit different. In fact, that's a little bit weird. I don't know how I feel about that. Has anybody had that experience before?
Yeah, me too. Experience this week. A little bit, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to do that again. It's inevitable because there's a famous U.S. historian who said something I just love. He said, "In the past, people always do things differently." And so all the time, we kind of take what we know here and now, and we just assume that in the past, they must have done something, if not the same, then at least sort of like we do. And so we bring all these things from now and place them back on the text. It's interesting. Things don't have to be 2,000 years old to do this either. We do this with things that are 30 minutes old. If you watch the news, right? And they tell you a story, and you're like, wait, what? It's not what this other station said. So I give you that, because, and another thing I think this is important too, that feeling of kind of like, what's going on? This is weird. Because it's not just any feeling, right, when you're talking about religious stuff. You're talking about the Bible, right? It means a little bit more than if you found out something new about, algebra or something, right? That's whatever, right? The Bible, religion, that's a different story. But let me tell you a little bit what's going on there and kind of how I think about things. Learning, right? We all know what learning is. You're attaining new information. Nice basic definition. Okay. Well, when you attain some new information, you then, and by definition, is this information you've heard before or not heard before? If you're learning. Stuff you haven't heard before. And you have to take that into your mind, the world you've made, and you have to figure out how, if at all, it fits into the way you see things. And you know what? It's kind of weird. It can be a little scary sometimes. But I will tell you this: it's normal. A lot of people, especially in people who are like studying the Bible and stuff, will have experiences like this. And they'll go, oh, wow, like my mom or my dad, my pastor, they told me this was this way, and you're telling me what? I don't know what to do. Well, your mom or your dad or whoever, they're not lying to you. They just might not know kind of all the things about a particular text. So they're not like purposely hiding anything. But just to let you know, that feeling, that's normal. That's just called learning, acquiring new information that you have to kind of adjust to. So there's going to be some of that today, I suspect. Okay. So this came up in a number of your questions. So you start off this story of Job, right, with the first 2 chapters, and then this prologue before we really get into this whole poetry bit. And he introduces that there once was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. Okay. Now, if you're reading, I want to do a little kind of experiment with you guys. And I want to talk about a genre. By genre, I mean there's different kinds of writing, isn't there? Like, for instance, would you read a stop sign differently than you'd read the phone book? If there were still phone books around? Let me think of a new... would you read Shakespeare the same way you read a stop sign? Or an owner's manual? Or a note from someone close to you? No. Genre is important. It dictates how you're going to read something, doesn't it? Okay. Well, when this starts off with this line, there once was a man in a land of booze whose name was Job. Does that bring a certain kind of flavor to it for anybody? Okay, well, okay. You guys got to it quicker than my class kids did, usually. Right. I don't necessarily use the word fairy tale, but I don't know that the story of Job is necessarily meant to be a historical story. And sometimes that makes people a little bit nervous, because they're like, wait a minute, I thought everybody in the Bible was a real person. But, you know, if you look closely, there's a lot of examples of stories being taught where they weren't ever at all intended to be real or historical people. I think there was a guy, I think his name was Jesus, I think. You may have heard of him, yeah? And he went around and told these stories that didn't actually ever happen, but they taught things, right? I think he had one about a mustard seed, right? Maybe a few others, seeds falling by the wayside. So notice that is not an uncommon thing to happen in the Bible. I think stories like Job, stories like Jonah, maybe Ruth. I think they're stories, but I would say they're maybe even a little bit more than a fairy tale, because they've got a real impactful thing that they're trying to put across to people. Okay, so that's kind of the first thing. So one thing that kind of was weird for me when I used to read Job, and I kind of read it as actually happening, is you start with this scene where God is kind of hanging out, and you've got this guy named Satan, and they're just kind of hanging out talking. And you're like, what? Like, it's kind of it's a scene like you don't see anywhere else in the Bible, right? Well, we get going, and we learn that the man was blameless. And if you have different words that kind of make a difference, let me know in your translations. The man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Does anybody else's translation say anything except for one who feared God? Everybody got that in there? What does it mean to fear God?
To obey God.
To obey God.
Respect.
To respect. Have you guys been prepared for this?
No.
What
I can work with you all on that. That's great.
When I bring up the word fear, kind of in a more current sense, I mean, that means to be afraid, right? I'm really afraid of hanging out in my house alone today because, this creeper's been walking our neighborhood or whatever. That's one kind of fear, right? But this phrase, fear in the Bible, 4/5 of the time you see the word fear, the object is God. So this phrase, fear of God, is the most common kind of context that you see fear used in. Now, the other way you can speak of fear, it's kind of like I'm really scared, there's a ghost over there or something, that is in the Bible in different places. But here in Job, and I believe throughout Job, that word fear in its context means exactly what you just said. It's the Hebrew word is yirat, and it means kind of a standing in awe of God, the object of it. It means kind of realizing how fragile your human existence is in relation to God's infinite existence. Just kind of standing there and, we get the word awesome from standing in awe, right? Yeah.
Does it mean at all that Job was worried to be around God or afraid of him, for his life or anything?
No, not in that sense, but there might be a little bit of that, but only in the sense that, oh my goodness, this is God. You don't see God walking down the street too often, right? So it's a new kind of deal. And so in that level, in that sense, sure. It might be kind of a new experience, but generally, people who God visits, it usually turns out to be a pretty good thing, right? So generally, God brings a lot of comfort, things like that. So for the most part, I think, fear is to fear God. You'll get this instruction in a number of places. Job is a big place. Proverbs is another place. Proverbs said that the key to wisdom is to fear God. Job's actually going to say the same thing. To fear God then, so to kind of just, recognize, kind of God's greatness, how awesome God is.